welcome back to another video. So today we are not working on Procreate, we are working with Pixquare today on the iPad. And if you're unfamiliar with Pixquare, it is a pixel art making app, perfect for like, let's say games or any kind of like pixel illustrations that you want to make. So I wanted to do another attempt of doing another kind of like illustration using Pixquare, just because I would like to get more used to using I guess like different methods to do different like illustrations using pixel art. I have done a few different videos using Pixquare, so if you're ever interested or have any questions about like general use, you can check out those videos. But let's talk about today's little session. So starting off, I decided to kind of like make a canvas size that I thought was an appropriate size, but in the end I ended up changing it to be a little bit smaller. So right here you can kind of see how small my brush is with the 1 pixel sized brush. I thought it was a little bit too large for what I was going for, so I decided to size down a little bit more so that it will be more appropriately sized for the current project that I wanted to work with. So here's another test. You can kind of see that it's a little bit better. I'm not working like super tiny like I did for some of my other drawing sessions that I've done. Pixel art is kind of like one of those like drawing methods, I guess, or styles that requires a lot more, I guess like know-how in terms of how you want pixels to represent certain objects or shapes and stuff, especially when it comes to like a smaller size. So I didn't want to go too small because I feel like every pixel counts at that point, and I didn't want to go too big because I don't want to accidentally lose the essence of doing pixel art. I feel like once you blow it up to a certain size, you're just using like a really thin brush and it's not really kind of like that pixel art aesthetic. I feel like once you can actually see like each kind of individual pixel to some degree, it's more readable as pixel art rather than just like a image that was drawn on a very small scale. So to start off, I am going to be doing a lot of like time-lapse footage for today, just because I find it a little bit easier for probably you guys to watch and see how the entire drawing kind of like pans out instead of doing small snippets, because I do zoom in quite a bit, so it's harder to see like the larger picture when I'm working with pixel art. So for today's drawing, if you did happen to see what I named the file initially, I am going to be drawing a little, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of like a framed portrait of Castorice or Castorice from Honkai Star Rail. So I will do an official drawing of her eventually, and I would like to do like the rest of the other people from Amphoreus. But for now, I wanted to play around with this concept. I don't know if you guys know this about me, but back in my kind of like uni days, I really liked kind of like Art Deco and Art Nouveau as kind of like the aesthetic and style. So a lot of like my stuff in my senior year, I kind of mixed that with like how I did watercolor painting and a few other aesthetics as well. But I kind of want to do another series for, I guess, like these Honkai Star Rail characters and like design kind of like the arch framing that I guess like Alphonse Mucha mostly did. I think that's the artist. Pretty sure. I don't remember if I'm like missing a letter from his name or something, but I'm pretty sure he's the kind of like definition of kind of like Art Nouveau. So I want to do a little bit of research and plan out a few illustrations. So you're gonna get like a little bit of a sneak peek today. I started off with doing like the little frame border for Castorice, and then I wanted to kind of keep the figure contained within the borders of our frame. Now I might change this concept a little bit. Instead of doing like these portraits, I might do like more full body poses. I think a couple of years ago I actually ended up doing only 2 paintings. I did one of Venti from Genshin Impact and Zhongli as well, and I kind of designed like kind of a Alphonse Mucha kind of Art Nouveau inspired watercolor paintings for them, and I abandoned that series. I think if I did it digitally, it might turn out the way that I want it to. I would love to do more like flats versus like more of a rendered piece in the center kind of aesthetic. We'll kind of like play around with what I can do and to kind of make it more cohesive looking, but I kind of wanted to play around with that concept just a smidge today for like the pixel art, just because I think it'd be fun to do kind of like almost multi-layered for the pixel illustration. From like previous sessions, I've done ones where it's mostly just like I drew a character, that's basically it, or when I did the animations, I kept it very simple with the foreground, background, and like a very small chibi to do the animations. So for this one, I did want to see if I could put my focus a little bit more with rendering a little bit of the frame and then putting Castorice in the center and seeing how that goes. So as for my layers right now, you can see that I had both my sketches kind of like on 2 separate layers, and then I'm lowering the opacity for Castorice right now, and then I'm going to try my best to keep everything organized. So I popped both of my sketches into their own individual folder, made a new folder so that we could start working on the frame. So I feel like I always run into like an identity crisis when it comes to working with pixel art. I feel like my style could work with pixel art, but I always try to do something like weird and funky with it, so it kind of looks a little off sometimes. So initially, also, I don't know if you can notice this. Sometimes like when I'm working with the brush, you can see like these little particles flying around. That's kind of like the little fun mode on Pixquare, and I think it's very cute. But for the sake of the video and like the time lapse, while I'm doing like line art, it might be a little distracting, so I decided to turn it off. But then in the end, it didn't really matter because I ended up not keeping the line art. I decided that I will kind of block in the shapes by doing flats first. Then I will do details and a little bit of like rendering and kind of like fleshing out the details afterwards. And then I will utilize a fun kind of like action or like a function in Pixquare, which happens to be the outline function, which I absolutely love. So I don't really have to worry about probably adding any type of line art for our frame. So I tried my best to block everything out. I'm still using the symmetry tool. I think in the future when I work on these illustrations for like the Art Nouveau inspired ones for the Honkai Star Rail characters, I will probably keep them a little bit more asymmetrical. One, I don't really like using the symmetry tool as much in like Procreate. Maybe in Clip Studio Paint's okay. I find it very useful in Pixquare, by the way, because it's just very easy to turn on and off, and then, you know, you can just make everything look even and clean. So I definitely utilize it a lot more when I was working on the frame than versus like when I'm working on Castorice, because she's at more like a free quarter angle. So while I'm working on the border, you can kind of see that initially I was gonna kind of like block everything out with this gold color, but then later on I decided to kind of like flesh out where I wanted some of the foliage and the vines to be, because I guess the whole point is like for the portraits that I want to do. As you guys know, I do like incorporating kind of like more foliage and flowers and all that stuff because I am very interested in trying my best to learn more about like flowers or like just the aesthetic of it, or just trying to get better at rendering them. So I would like to incorporate them into the actual frame of each of the pieces. So right here, I decided to go with very simple colors. I didn't go overboard with the flowers just because I was scared about the color palette not matching well with Castorice. I don't know if I want to match the colors almost like 1-to-1, where it's very much like whatever Castorice's colors are, I would use them in the frame, or do I want like a contrasting color to really brighten up the frame or make the frame have a little bit more contrast compared to the character in the center. So that's gonna be something I'm gonna play with, but for now I was kind of carving out the frame from the vines, and then you can see here is when I started to use the outline feature. So because I'm speeding through this, I don't really go through, I guess like this is kind of a little hack that I like to do when I'm working with the outline feature. So I actually duplicated my frame into 2 layers. I only turned one of them to have the outline feature turned on, and I set the line art to be quite dark, or like the outline to be dark. I set that layer below the one that does not have the outline feature on. Then I alpha lock it, and I can just basically paint over just the outlines, and I can change it to be a little bit softer. Now luckily in Pixquare, you have the ability to replace like a color 1-for-1. So like if I wanted to change a specific blue color to be red now, I can definitely do that. But because I was being very selective with the colors that I wanted to change, I found it easier just to alpha lock and just change the outline color manually for certain parts. Now with the frame kind of like done very simply, this is not going to be like the final draft for Castorice's frame when I do the illustrations. I am going to be putting a little bit more effort into like trying to find appropriate flowers and foliage to frame our character, alongside with some other imagery, because there's other like design elements and stuff that is like present in Art Nouveau. So I'll definitely look some stuff up, do some drafting, and maybe I'll take you guys along with me whenever I do the planning. But we are moving on to kind of like doing simple line art for the figure in the center. So even though I kind of flip-flop in terms of wanting to use line art for pixel art, or if I like to block things out then do line art after, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a back and forth for myself. I do end up at the very end merging all of my layers together so that I could basically render everything the same way I do in Procreate, where I merge my line art and my colors together and just work on the one layer. But for now, to keep everything clean, it's easier for me to just do the line art first. But unfortunately, I don't think I could really interpret my own sketch when I was doing it. So there is a lot of hair strands and just part of her body that is on the left-hand side that is like very hard to really carve out anything. So I am going to struggle quite a bit until we start merging the layers and I can like chunk out some of the pieces a little bit easier. So I don't remember if I prefaced this at the very beginning of the video, but I am not like very proficient in doing pixel art. I think I mentioned this in the other previous 2 videos because I don't take a lot of time and care in terms of like cleaning up edges and making sure that, you know, there's not really 2 pixels placed that makes like an awkward corner, or like I'm not doubling up on pixels to make them super clean. I think that's why I also wanted to size up just a smidge so that I was not too worried about making too many areas not read correctly, because, you know, like I said, if you size down and go smaller with pixel art, the more that 1 pixel makes like a big difference. So if you're working like on a 16 by 16, then, you know, you're gonna have to really utilize your 16 by 16 pixels and make sure that each one conveys what you need it to be, because like changing 1 pixel could like make your eyes look off, or like the face look a little bit wonky or chunky or thinner, or like whichever way you're not trying to make your character look. I'll see if I can find some examples where I'm working with like a much smaller scale, and I am a little bit more particular when we're working at a smaller scale with like, I guess like, I don't do as much line art for those ones either, because I feel like whenever I use line art on a smaller scale, I'm taking up too much real estate. But even for this one, I was struggling quite a bit. Aligning certain things to look correctly for pixel art, where I feel like the grid matters to a certain degree, but as soon as you tilt it, some things do read a little bit funky. So I definitely think her eyes are just like a little bit misaligned, and I'll be fixing her face a little bit later on, because like I mentioned, when I start to merge my layers, I do start to like chunk or select bigger areas to fix right away. But for now, we're gonna try our best to kind of get things up to maybe 60, no, not 60, maybe like 70 to 80% done before I start to merge everything. So before I started coloring in Castorice, I decided to drop in a background color. I'm not super pleased with the color I chose. I don't think it works very well in its entirety. Even like after I finish like coloring her in, the background color doesn't really stand out, which is great, but I don't think it really matches the entire aesthetic. But that's like something that I kind of struggle with when it comes to pixel art. I know like people who are very proficient in doing pixel art probably have a good knowledge on how to make a very harmonious color palette to some degree. I know some people use like more like limited color palettes, or like, you know, you want to reduce the amount of colors for each areas, I guess, so that there's not too much going on. And like I said, this probably is more geared towards like if you're working on a smaller scale, limited palette reads a lot easier and better. But as we size up, I just kind of like almost paint the same way for everything else, but I tried my best not to go too crazy with the colors. But because of that, I feel like not everything meshed really well. It probably would have helped if I started to block in each of the colors, like the base colors, all in at once to find like a more harmonious color palette, and then decide like shadow colors, highlight colors, and stuff like that. But because I was chunking it in the same way that I work in Procreate or in Clip Studio Paint, I definitely think it's a little bit harder for me to get a color palette that I really liked that kind of worked well. A lot of the times, like when I'm digitally painting, I do kind of like do light passes of color on top of one another to mix new colors that would work a little bit easier together. And it's just easier for me to incorporate like surrounding colors into certain areas. So let's say if the hair color is blue, I can add it to the skin a little bit, or if they have red eyes, I can add that into the hair so that everything kind of like meshes together just by context. But here I feel like I could utilize like the opacity a little bit more for the brush and then kind of like mix the colors, pick up a new color and try it out. But instead I started to just like really darken things and darken up areas to try to push the contrast, but I kind of lost the idea of keeping the color palette a little bit more in mind. I even think like as soon as I will start working on the little portraits and stuff, I don't know what exactly I want to use them for. If I want to do them like for prints, I think it'd be cool if I can make them into like clear bookmarks. So I might have to look into the size and stuff, or like clear acrylic charms. There's just so many things I want to make right now, but just very little time. But I'll see what I can do, because I think it would be cool to have like a physical object for this little mini project for the most part. If not, I'll just leave them as illustrations because I think they'll read well as like a set, and I think that could be very fun to do. Oh, actually maybe I can make them into photo cards. Maybe a weird size though, with the borders and stuff. We'll see. I'll see how I will design them, because maybe if I can keep the photo card borders in mind, I can make them work out. We'll see. Just like me thinking aloud at this point. So another thing I think I ended up doing is that after I finished like coloring up everything to a certain degree, I ended up locking my line art layer, which I did right now, and I started to block in and lighten up some colors so that I can try to get a difference in, I guess, like where my light is coming from. So I had my sun, or like my lighting set up from the upper right hand corner. So I wanted the line art to be a little bit softer, especially in her hair and kind of like near her face. And then everything else can be a little bit of that darker purple. So in terms of merging, I initially merged everything together, but I wanted to do was to merge just Castorice and the background together into one layer so that I could paint on top and then keep the border separate. That way I can have the ability to erase behind the border and not accidentally erase anything important. So I made sure to keep those two portions at least separate, but everything else is basically all merged together. So like any of the hair layer, the skin layer, the eyes, the line art, the base, and the background were all merged into one. And then the kind of border was already in its own kind of like little layer on its own anyway, so it didn't really matter too much for that one. But kind of like this portion of the time lapse is kind of where I was adjusting things. So I ended up shifting her mouth downwards alongside with her nose, because the way that I initially drew her in the sketch and when I was doing like the line art and stuff, she had more of like a rounder baby face. But if you look at like Castorice's model, she's not exactly like a, I guess like not like a young girl, I guess, if that makes sense. So I wanted to elongate her face a little bit to make it look a little bit more mature, so that she wasn't as like cherub round, if that makes sense. And then after that, I went ahead and started to render things out. This is when I kind of abandoned the color palette a little bit too. I started choosing to darken things up without just choosing pre-existing colors in the color palette. So I tried my best to, you know, just make it work in terms of like, as long as I liked it in the end, I was just kind of satisfied. I was going to probably do another one with Anaxa so that I could do him alongside with Castorice, but I think I will just do maybe like a digital portrait series and take you guys along with me, or I'll do something so that I can kind of like document it so you guys can kind of see the entire process. But for the most part, everything here is just me kind of like doing the rendering process to some degree, changing line colors, adding a little bit of shadows, adding line width variation into the, I guess, like certain areas of the line art, which, you know, to some degree isn't as important, but for me, it's just kind of fun. I do want to like play around more with probably pixel art in general, so I will probably be using Pixquare a lot more in the near future, just planning out like smaller things like my little pixel chibis that I did for Honkai Star Rail and Ensemble Stars, or doing like little illustrations and stuff, because I think it would be nice to see if I can find a way to translate my style in a very more natural way. I don't know. You guys can let me know. Do you think like the way that I've done the pixel art today in Pixquare, it's like recognizable that it's my art, or is it completely different and it doesn't really look like my style? I think I just want something that's like a happy medium in between pixel art and like my current style of like how I digitally paint. Maybe it's like the colors as well. I'm not like jiving with, I don't know. We'll see what happens at the very end. Oh, another thing is that I think I added another layer and ended up doing like a little bit of a white outline on the inside of our frame to kind of almost like make it look like a glass frame, if that makes sense. Just because I wanted to push her back like ever so slightly, so I decided to put the white so that there's a separation. But the last thing I'm gonna do, and this will be an easier way for you guys to see the utility of using the outline tool. So made a new layer on top of everything, and I started to block in kind of like these little white sparkles around the entire piece. And it's not necessarily hard for me to manually outline, but you can see that if I just select a color and then go up to our dot dot dots at the very top of our Pixquare, we can use the outline feature, and automatically basically outlines whatever your current color is to the object or the layer that you're on. And I don't really have to worry about adding an outline manually, so that's perfect for me. And it's great if you don't really want to do line art like I did for the borders. Ended up using the outline tool to give it a little bit of an edge. Oh, I wanted to show you guys how to export. So if you click on the little export function, I'm going to change the name to be like actual normal file name. You can also change the size multiplier here. So even though we're working at a very tiny size, about, I think it's, what does that say, 150 by 200? I went about 20 times the size so that we're actually at a decent resolution, or like, you know, a 300 by 400 size canvas, I believe. So when I export it, it'll be like a not super tiny drawing. Otherwise, you can also change the file type as well. So right here, you can see there's a plethora of different little settings you can change. I went ahead and selected time lapse so that you guys can have access to the full time lapse at the very end. I needed to change the size as it exceeded the max amount that it allowed me. After that, we hit export and we can just wait until this loading bar is finished and you'll have like your full little time lapse. And I set mine to 0.5 because I usually have my time lapses to be only half a minute, I believe, like 30 seconds basically. So I wanted the kind of time lapse to be consistent throughout for like the rest of my other videos as well. And this is kind of what it looks like, but I'm not going to be showing you guys the full time lapse here. I'll show it at the very end. So the last thing I wanted to show you guys is just like a little bit of a comparison. So I'm going to split my screen and have the previous one that I did, which is of Herta. So I did not do a video for the one that I did of Herta. It was just kind of as a community post, but I did get some questions. But basically I followed pretty much the similar steps to the one that I did of Castorice today. So if you're ever interested, do let me know if you want to see more pixel art videos. I'll be happy to do more and experiment. But other than that, I think that is it for today's video, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!